Chapter 2. Balyn and Balan.
In Caerleon, King Arthur remained for many months, gathering his followers from all parts of the country, and preparing them for the great battles that were to come, when they should go over all the land of Britain, and across the sea into Armorica, which we now call Brittany, to punish the cruel and wicked, and drive out or bring to order the heathen Saxons. And while he was still preparing for the war, King Rhiannon of North Wales, one of the proudest and cruelest of the enemies of Loegres, sent a message to King Arthur. And this was the message: that Rhiannon had conquered 11 lesser kings, and cut off their beards to make a border to his royal mantle, and he would spare King Arthur on condition that he sent his beard to make the 12th on the mantle, as a token that Rhiannon should be his overlord and his master. Otherwise he would enter Arthur's lands to burn and slay, until he had by force not only Arthur's beard, but his head also. "This is the most shameful and unrighteous message I have ever received," said King Arthur to his messengers. "Go back to Rhiannon, the savage. Tell him that I will come against him with all my knights, and fight until his head is smitten off, unless he comes to do me homage. For I owe him none who am by right king of all Britain, and by divine will the maker of the realm of Loegres, in which realm there is no place for such a monster as this Rhiannon." The messengers went away, and before long news came that King Rhiannon was gathering together an army, and that bands of his wicked followers were already ravaging the lands of Arthur's true subjects, burning and slaying wherever they came. But there were other powers of evil warring against Loegres, powers of magic harder to guard against and to overcome than King Rhiannon or the Saxons. As Arthur held court with his knights in the castle of Caerleon, there came one day a damsel bearing a message to him, and when she had delivered her message, she let the cloak fall from her shoulders, and all could see that a great sword was fastened to her side. "Wherefore do you wear that sword, lady?" asked Arthur. "Such an instrument of war does not suit a fair damsel such as you." "Now that you have asked me," replied the damsel, "I may tell you. This sword I bear with me is a token of my sorrow. I may not be free from it until I find a knight, a passing good man in deed and thought, without wickedness or treachery or evil thinking, who is able to draw it from the scabbard. I have been to the court of King Rhiannon, where I was told there were good knights, but none might achieve the sword." "A great marvel indeed," said Arthur, "yet not so strange among the followers of Rhiannon. But now let one of my knights set his hand to the hilt of it." Then a brave knight took hold of the sword and pulled it eagerly, but he could not draw it. "There is no need to pull half so hard," said the damsel. "In the right man's hand it will come out at a touch. But he must be a gentle knight, well born and without evil in his heart." One after another the knights tried to draw the sword, but in turn each of them failed. "Alas," sobbed the damsel, "I had thought that in the court of King Arthur I would have found one man, true enough knight, to draw forth my sword." "By my faith," said Arthur, half angered at her words, "here are knights as good as any in the world, but they are not fated to help you, which troubles me sorely."
But it happened that a young knight named Balyn, whom no one thought much of, for he had lately been in prison for killing a cousin of King Arthur's, came into the hall while all this was going on. "Fair damsel," he said presently, "I pray you of your kindness, let me try also to draw the sword. I am but a poor knight of Northumberland, but strong and passionate, and maybe these humble garments hide a better man than they seem." "You speak wisely," said the damsel, "therefore try your fortune also." Then Balyn took the sword by the girdle and sheath, and drew it out easily. And when he looked upon the keen shining blade, he loved it so much that it seemed worth more than the most precious thing in the world. Many of the knights murmured, being jealous of Balyn. But the damsel said, "Certainly this is a passing good knight, the best in all this land, and many great and wondrous deeds shall he do. But now, kind and courteous sir, I beg you to give me back my sword." "Not so," answered Balyn. "With this sword I shall never part." "You are not wise to keep it," said the damsel, "for with it you shall slay the best friend that you have, and the man you love best in the world, and that sword shall be your own destruction. It is a magic weapon, which the lady of the Isle of Avalon gave to me. I will take my chances of what may come, replied Balyn, but this sword I will not give up. Then the damsel made many lamentations, and departed from the court in sorrow. And while Balyn stood to one side looking at his sword and rejoicing in it, and as the other knights crowded together talking of what had happened, the Lady of the Lake came suddenly into the hall and stood before King Arthur. "Sire," she cried, "I hold you to your word. When I gave you your own sword, you promised to grant me a gift." "That is true," said Arthur. "Therefore ask what you will, and you shall have it, if it is in my power to give." "Well," said the Lady of the Lake, "give me the head of this knight, who but now drew the sword which the damsel brought. I had rather that you had cut off her head, but it is too late for that." "Truly," answered King Arthur, troubled and surprised at her words, "I cannot in honour grant you the life of either of them. Sir Balyn is my guest." "I will take nothing else," cried the Lady of the Lake. Now when Balyn heard this, a madness seemed to come over him. "Evil woman," he cried, "you would have my head, would you? Rather you shall now lose your own." And there and then, in the presence of King Arthur, he sprang forward and cut off her head at a single stroke. "Alas, for the shame!" said King Arthur, while all his knights murmured with reproach and disgust. "Why have you done this? You have disgraced me and all my court, for this damsel came to visit me, and was a lady of high worth. Therefore I will never forgive you for this deed." "Sire," answered Balyn, "be not displeased with me, for this lady was the falsest living, who had brought many brave men to their death, and women also." "Whatever the cause," said Arthur, "you have done a wicked and shameful thing. Go now from my court and from the realm of Logris, for you are no true knight unless you may redeem your honour by some brave deed or long penance." Balyn went with speed, mounted his horse, and rode out of Caerleon. Beyond the gate he commanded his squire to leave him. "Go home to Northumberland," he said, "and tell them what has chanced. I myself shall ride in search of King Rion, and slay him, or die in the attempt. For if I slay Rion, then surely King Arthur will be my friend again." But in King Arthur's court there was great wrath and uproar, and in the midst of it a proud knight of Ireland, Sir Lancelyn, who was jealous of Balyn for winning the sword, asked leave of King Arthur to ride after him and seek vengeance for the ill deed which had been done. "Do your best," said Arthur, "for I am much angered with Balyn. I would that we might wipe out the shame that has fallen upon Logris by reason of that cowardly blow." Sir Lancelyn went from court with all the haste he might, and it was not long before he overtook Balyn. But meanwhile Merlin came suddenly to the king and said, "Evil has come into Logris, and greater shall follow. The damsel who brought the sword has set the seeds of great and terrible things. That sword she had, by false means, from the Lady of the Isle of Avalon, and in that sword dwells a curse which must be borne to the end that in after days a blessing may come upon Logris by that sword in the hand of Galahad, truest knight of Logris. But alas for Balyn, for the curse is upon him who would have been of the bravest and best of your knights. He goes to his death, and naught can save him. Yet I will follow and see what good I may bring to him." While this was happening, Sir Lancelyn had come up with Balyn, who was riding up into the hills of Wales. "Stay a while," he shouted as soon as he might be heard, "or I will make you stay whether you mean to or not. The shield you carry before you shall not help you, for I am after you." "Maybe you would have done better to stay at home," said Balyn, turning to meet him. "Whence come you, and for what reason?" "I am from the court of King Arthur," answered Lancelyn, "and I come to punish you for the evil stroke that you struck this day in his presence." "It grieves me much to have offended the best of kings," said Balyn, "but that damsel whom I slew was the wickedest in the world." "Make you ready, base knight," was all that Lancelyn would reply. So the two of them fought there upon the hillside, and the end of it was that Balyn smote Sir Lancelyn through the body, so that he fell to the ground dead. Balyn stood beside him and was filled with sorrow at the death of a brave knight, but greater sorrow was to follow, for as he stood a lovely maiden on a white horse came riding full speed up the hill. When she saw Lancelyn lie bleeding on the road, she cried aloud in great sorrow, and came and flung herself on the ground beside him. "Ah, Balyn," she sobbed, "a sad stroke have you stricken. You have slain 2 bodies with 1 heart, and 2 hearts in 1 body, and 2 souls are lost by it." Then she took up Balyn's sword, which lay on the ground, and before he could stop her, flung herself upon the point of it, and fell dead across the body of Sir Lancelyn, whom she had loved better than life. If Balyn was sad before, he was doubly sad now that he had caused the death of 2 such true lovers. And he would not be comforted, even when his brother, Balan, found him there. Balan, whom he loved better than any in the world.
"Many sad things have indeed befallen you," said Balin, "but we must endure even the hardest adventures that God sends us." "That is true," said Balin. "And now let us ride on, for I would find and slay the wicked Rion of North Wales, so that King Arthur may pardon me for the death of the Lady of the Lake." "I will come also," said Balin, "and put my body in adventure with you, as a brother ought to do." Deeper and deeper into the hills they went, through thick forests and by gloomy passes, and on a sudden they met Merlin, but Merlin disguised, so that they did not recognize him. "Whither do you ride?" asked Merlin. "We do not tell our business to strangers," said the 2 knights, Balin adding, "but tell us who you are that ask it." "At this time I will not tell you," replied Merlin. "That is an evil sign," said Balin. "Surely you are no true man if you will not tell us your name." And he put his hand to his sword. "But I will tell you your name," answered Merlin quietly. "You are Balyn, the knight of the sword, and this is Balin your brother, and you go now to meet with King Rion, but your quest will be of little use unless you are advised by me." "Ah," said Balin, bowing reverently, "you are Merlin. We will indeed be ruled by your wisdom." "Follow me," said Merlin, "and you shall do a knightly deed. But unknightly deeds have been done by the knight of the sword. Yet good as well as evil shall come of them to Logres. Sir Lancelyn lies dead, and with him his beloved, the Lady Columba. King Mark of Cornwall has found them, and will build a fair tomb above their bodies. In the days to come the greatest battle ever fought between 2 knights shall fall out just there, between Lancelot and Tristram, whom the land knows not yet. And King Mark shall find sorrow there also. But woe to you, Balyn, for you shall strike the dolorous stroke. Yet for the healing of that stroke shall the Holy Grail come to Logres, and the good knight Sir Galahad shall achieve it, and thereafter shall the darkness fall once more upon Logres." These things, which the good enchanter told to them, filled Balyn and Balan with awe and wonder, and they rode on in silence until the fall of night. "Dismount now," said Merlin. "Unbridle your horses, leave them, and follow me." In the midst of a dark wood they came to a little glade filled with soft moonlight. "Abide hereby," said Merlin, "for at midnight King Rion comes here secretly with but a few men to take by force the Lady of Vance, who is to pass this way with 2 knights in search of her lord." King Rion came with 20 armed men, and Balyn and Balan attacked them with such fury that many were slain and the rest fled. But King Rion turned to fight with Balyn, and after a great battle he fell wounded to the ground. "Brave knights," said Rion, "I pray you slay me not. You may gain much by my life, but little by my death." "You speak truth," said Balyn. "You shall come yet living to King Arthur." "I will lead him to Caerleon," said Merlin, "for here you must abide till the great battle that is to be, when you shall do King Arthur good service." Merlin came to Caerleon as Arthur was about to march into North Wales. "I bring you your worst enemy, but he was overcome and taken by 2 good knights whom you shall know at the great battle you go now to fight. It shall be before the walls of Castle Terrabil, and there you shall conquer 12 kings." King Arthur marched onward, and the 12 knights made ready for him. King Rion was with them no longer, but Lot of Orkney had been persuaded by evil counsel to join them, which was a sad thing, for he was a brave man and a good and noble king. and the husband of Morgause, Arthur's half-sister. All through one long day the battle of Castle Terrabil was fought, and for long it seemed that Arthur must lose. But on a sudden 2 knights came riding out of the forest and entered the battle from behind, striking such blows and fighting so furiously that the 12 kings thought that a new army was come against them, and broke and fled. In the evening only King Lot remained alive of the 12 kings, and only his followers still fought on, for none could overcome King Lot. Then on a sudden came King Pellinore, following the questing beast across the world as his fate was, and he fought with Lot and struck him such a mighty blow with his sword that Lot fell to the ground and died, and the hosts of Orkney fled into the darkness. "You have won a great battle for Logres," said Merlin, "but the victory belongs to the Knight of the Sword and his brother, and to the Knight of the Questing Beast." "And who are these?" asked Arthur. "King Pellinore I know, but not the others." "It is Balyn, who drew the damsel's sword," said Merlin, "and Balyn his brother. Balyn you will meet once again, but Balyn never. They shall die both on the same day, a sorrowful unholy death. The tale of Balyn and Balyn shall be the saddest of any, for he who drew that sword is the most unfortunate of all knights." "Alas," said King Arthur, "that is a pity indeed, for I owe him much gratitude for his deeds this day, and I have little deserved what he has done for me." After the battle Arthur marched on through the great forests which covered so much of Britain in those days, to make war against the Saxons in the north. And one day, when they had pitched camp in the forest, and King Arthur was resting in his pavilion with an open glade near by, he heard the sound of a horse's hoofs, and looking out he saw a knight ride slowly by, who sighed and lamented loudly, as if some dreadful ill had befallen him. "Stay a while, fair sir," cried Arthur, "and tell me wherefore you sorrow thus." "You can do nothing to help me," said the knight, and he rode sadly on his way. A little while later came Balyn, and knelt to King Arthur. "Now by my head," said the king, "you are right welcome." "I may not abide," said Balyn, "for a sore curse is upon me, and evil will come upon all those who are with me for long. But I pray you, my good lord king, give me some quest to follow, so that I may strike for the making of Logres before the evil overcomes me." "Grieves me that you cannot stay to follow me," said King Arthur, "but Merlin has told me of your fate. And as for a quest, but now a knight rode by, crying and lamenting some great sorrow. Wherefore I desire you to follow him and bring him to me, that we may help him, if any help is to be found in man." Balyn rode on as fast as he could, and before long found the knight riding beside a damsel in the forest. "Sir knight," he cried, "you must turn round and come back with me to King Arthur to tell him the cause of your sorrow." "That I will not," said the knight, "for it will harm me greatly, and do me no good." "Sir," said Balyn, "I pray you, make ready to obey me, for otherwise I will fight with you and bring you by force." "You will promise me safe conduct if I come?" said the knight. "There is much evil abroad in this forest, yet from black enchantment I cannot fly." "Surely I will give you safety," said Balyn, "or else die for it." They rode back after this, the damsel waiting in the forest, until they came to the king's pavilion. But there, right in front of it, in the very presence of King Arthur, there came one invisible and smote the knight who rode with Balyn through the body with a spear. "Alas," said the knight, "even under your safe conduct am I slain. That was the false knight Garlon, who by black magic rides invisible. The evil has come upon me as I feared it would. But mount now my horse, which is faster than your own. Ride back to the damsel in the forest, and follow the quest that I was on, as she will lead you, till you have avenged my death." Then the knight fell dead to the ground, and in great sorrow Balyn mounted his horse and rode to the damsel, whom he told of all that had happened. Together they rode on toward the castle of Meliot, but before they reached it they overtook another knight who was returning from hunting. They rode with him on his way, but in a little came Garlon the invisible knight, and smote him as well, so that he fell down and died. "For this also shall I do vengeance upon Garlon, the coward and traitor," said Balyn. And they came to the gateway of the castle Meliot. Balyn strode first over the drawbridge into the castle, with the damsel behind him. But as soon as he had paused under the gateway, the portcullis was let down,
so that there was a grating of iron and wood between him and the damsel. Then men ran together and took the damsel, and it seemed to Balyn that they were about to kill her. He could not break through the portcullis, but instead he ran up the nearest stairway and jumped 20 feet from a window into the dry moat, and fell upon the men with drawn sword. "Fair knight," said the leader of them, "we will not fight with you, nor would we do harm to you or to the damsel. But the lady of this castle has lain sick many a year, and the custom of the land is that all damsels who pass this way must seek to heal her, which may be done with the blood of a pure maid of noble birth, and the maid shall not suffer therefrom." "Well," said Balyn, "if the damsel wills it, you may take blood from her, but do her no harm, for I would not for my life that any ill should befall her." Then they came within the castle, and the damsel gave of her blood in a silver dish, but it did not heal the lady, for only the sister of the pure knight Sir Percival could do that when, in the days to come, she and her brother should pass that way in quest of the Holy Grail. After this, the knight of Meliot, who was lord of the castle, made Balyn and the damsel welcome to a good feast and comfortable lodgings. But as they sat at supper, Balyn heard in the next room the sound of a man groaning as if in great pain. "What is that noise?" he asked. "But a little while ago," said the knight of Meliot, "I jousted at Castle Carbonek, and twice I smote down a knight of King Pelles following. Then this villain knight swore to be revenged by hurting the one I loved best, and the next day he rode invisible and smote my son, who may not now be healed of his grievous wound until I have that knight's blood, whose name ever I know not."
"Ah," said Balyn, "that knight is Garlon, who has slain 2 knights in like manner. Indeed, I am now in quest of him, that I may slay him to avenge the wrong he has done to this damsel." "I will tell you how to find him," cried the knight of Meliot. "King Pelles will shortly hold a great feast in Castle Carbonek, to which any knight may come, but each must bring with him his chosen damsel, and there you shall find this Garlon, your enemy and mine." The very next morning they set out, and in 15 days came to Castle Carbonek, and were welcomed to the feast. But the knight of Meliot was made to remain outside, since he had brought no lady with him. Balyn was led to a fair chamber, where he was unarmed and clothed in rich robes. Now his sword was taken from him, for the custom was that no man might come armed to the feast. But Balyn hid his own long dagger beneath his robe, and so came down with his damsel into the great hall, where the other knights and ladies were gathered. Presently Balyn asked, "Is there not a knight in this court whose name is Garlon?" "Over there you may see him," he was told, "the knight with the cruel dark face. But indeed he is the most marvellous man now living, for he can ride invisible, and slay whomever he will." "Indeed," said Balyn, "so that is Garlon." And then he thought to himself, "If I kill him here, where all these knights and ladies may see, I shall not escape with my life. But if I leave him now, I may never find him again, and he will do much harm if he lives." Now as he sat looking at him and wondering what to do, Garlon saw him, and coming over, struck him in the face, saying, "Knight, why do you stare at me like this? For shame, eat your meat and do what you came for." "It was shame indeed not to avenge this insult, and all the other ill deeds which you have done," cried Balyn, springing up. "And as to what I came for, it was to do this." And as he spoke he drew his dagger and stabbed Garlon in the heart, so that he fell down dead. Then there was a great commotion in the hall. "Sir, where have you slain Garlon, who was my guest?" cried King Pelles. "For this evil deed surely you shall be slain before you depart from the castle of Carbonek." "Well," said Balyn, "come and kill me if you dare." "Yes," said King Pelles, "no man shall do it but I, for Garlon was my knight." And as he said this, King Pelles snatched a great sword from the wall and struck fiercely at Balyn, who guarded the blow from his head with the long dagger. But so mighty a stroke had King Pelles stricken that Balyn's dagger flew into small pieces. When Balyn found that he was weaponless, he turned and ran, seeking for a sword or a spear with which to fight, and King Pelles followed him, still in a great rage. Away went Balyn, out of the hall, with King Pelles behind him, along stone passages, up dark spiral staircases, and through room after room of that great mysterious castle.
And at last he came to a great tower far away from the part where anyone lived, or had lived for many centuries. And still up and up the tower he went, until, near the top, he paused at a closed door, and a great feeling of awe and fear began to creep over him. But he heard King Pelles clattering up the stone steps behind him, so he pushed open the door and sprang into the room. As Balyn stepped across the threshold, a voice said to him, "Enter not into this room, for you are unworthy." But there was no one in the room. Balyn looked about him, and saw a table made of silver standing in an alcove under an archway of the most beautiful carved marble. The table was spread with a fair white cloth which showed no sign of dust or age, and on it stood a great cup under a silken cloth. And it seemed to Balyn that the cup was filled with light, so that he could hardly bear to look at it. He was trembling now, he did not know why, and he seemed to wish nothing so much as to kneel before that table and the cup upon it and pray for the blessing of God. But he saw above the table a strange spear, which hung point downwards with nothing to support it. And once more he heard King Pelles behind him, stumbling over the threshold of the room. Then Balyn leapt forward to seize the spear. "Sinner, touch it not!" cried the voice again. But he did not heed it, for now he seemed to wish for nothing but to turn and slay King Pelles. King Pelles stood in the doorway, and he had dropped his weapon, and all the hate had gone from him. But Balyn, in his madness, took the spear and struck the dolorous stroke, wounding King Pelles deeply in the side. Then the castle of Carbonek shook and rocked. All became dark, and a great wind seemed to seize Balyn and whirl him about and cast him bleeding and senseless on the ground, while a terrible cry of woe rang in his ears and went echoing away across the distance. 3 days Balyn lay senseless among the ruins which alone remained of much of the castle, and on the 4th Merlin came and drew him out and set him upon a horse. "Sir, I would have my damsel," said Balyn feebly, as he came to himself again. "See," answered Merlin, "where she lies dead, and many another with her. You have struck the dolorous stroke, and laid waste 3 counties. For the cup you saw was the holy grail wherefrom our blessed Lord Jesus Christ drank the wine at the Last Supper, and the spear which you laid impious hands upon once pierced his side as he hung upon the cross for all our sins. Now Pelles, the maimed king, lies wounded with a wound unhealable in the hall of Castle Carbonek, until Galahad, the pure knight, shall come to cure him after many years. Joseph of Arimathea, in whose tomb our Lord was laid ere he rose again, brought them to Britain and died yonder in Castle Carbonek. The spear has accomplished the evil that must fall upon Logris, but the Grail awaits the truest holiness and purity, wherewith Logris shall be blessed for a little while before the end. But ride on now, for your fate calls you, and my own fate draws near also." Sad at heart, Balyn rose forward through the wastelands, and as he passed the people cried to him, "Ah, Balyn, you have brought great sorrow upon this country. Doubt not but that vengeance shall fall upon you." At last he came out of those desolate fields and villages into the deep forests, and rode through them 8 days, until he came to a castle set on the bank of a fair, broad river. And as he came out of the forest, he heard a hunting horn blow the mort, which is the call blown ever at the death of a deer. "That blast," said Balyn, "is blown for me, for I am the prize, and yet I am not dead." A long bridge led across the river to the castle, and as Balyn drew near, a great company came riding across it to meet him, 100 maidens singing more sweetly than the plaintive nightingale, and 100 knights, richly dressed, riding gravely behind them. The lady of the castle came to Balyn and said, "Sir knight, welcome are you to my castle. Here you may rest in peace after your toils and sorrows. But first, for so the custom is, you must fight with the knight of the river, for he is our champion, who dwells upon the island in midstream, and all who enter the castle must pass him." "It is a bad custom," said Balyn, that a knight may not pass this way without doing battle with a stranger." "You need but this one battle," said the lady. "Well," answered Balyn, "since I must fight, I am ready now. My horse is still fresh, though my heart is weary, and I long to sleep." "Noble sir," said a knight to Balyn, "I think that your shield is too small for such a battle. Use mine, I beg you." Balyn thanked the knight, took his shield, and rode down towards the river, looking to his armor as he went to see that he was well prepared for the fight. As he came to the ford of the river, a damsel leant over the side of the bridge near by and said, "O knight Balyn, why have you left your own shield? Alas, you have put yourself in great danger yet, for by the painting on your shield you would have been known. Alas, of all knights surely you are the most unfortunate." "I am sorry that ever I came within this country," said Balyn, "but I may not turn back now, for all would think that I was afraid." He came to the island, and there was a knight in black armor waiting for him, with visor closed and no coat of arms upon his shield. In silence they set their spears in rest, and rode at one another, so hard that their spears were shattered, and each flung from his horse so hard that they lay insensible for a few minutes. But soon they were on their feet again, and fighting fiercely with their swords. First Balyn smote the Black Knight with his unhappy sword, so that the blood ran down to the ground, and then he was himself smitten until he fell. As he rose to fight on, Balyn saw that the bridge and the castle walls were crowded with fair knights and sweet ladies who watched there in silence while the battle was fought. To it again they went, striking great strokes that might each have killed a weaker man, and on until much of their armor was smitten away, and each was wounded with 7 cruel wounds from which the lifeblood ran down on to the grass. And at last the Black Knight sank to the ground, unable longer to stand on his feet. Balyn stood leaning on his sword, but without it he too would have fallen. "What knight are you?" he asked hoarsely, "for never till this day did I meet with one so brave, except only my brother." "My name," said the Black Knight, "is Balyn, brother to the good knight Balyn." "Alas, that ever I should have lived to see this day!" cried Balyn, and he fell to the ground in a swoon for loss of blood, and in horror of what had chanced. Very slowly and painfully, crawling on his hands and knees, Balyn drew near to Balyn, unlaced his helmet, and looked upon his face. And Balyn awoke and cried, "O Balyn, my brother, whom I love better than any man in the world, you have slain me, and I have slain you also. And men shall speak in sorrow of our deaths for evermore." "Alas, that ever this should be!" sobbed Balyn. "Had you but carried your own shield, I would have known you by the arms upon it. And had I not overcome and slain the knight who kept this island in pastimes, I would not now have been its keeper, armed, all in black." Then the lady of the castle and her followers came to them, and Balyn said, "Lady, the same mother bore us, who now die in the same hour, slain each by the other, unknowing whom we struck. Bury us, I pray, in the same tomb, and write upon it that here lie 2 brothers who slew one another by mischance, so that all who pass may pray for our souls." Then Balyn died, and Balyn a little later, and the lady of the castle caused their tomb to be made there upon the island in the river, and she set Balyn's name upon the tomb, but his brother's she did not know. When this was done, Merlin came suddenly to the place, and bade them write the name of Balyn, and that he was the unhappy knight who struck the dolorous stroke. Then he took the unlucky sword which had been broken in the fight, and set a new blade in the hilt, and laughed softly as he did so. "Why do you laugh?" asked the lady of the castle. "For this cause," said Merlin. "No man shall handle this sword now, save only Lancelot and Galahad his son, and that shall be when the knights of Logres seek for the Holy Grail. In the castle also you have a bed, but none shall lie in it without going mad, save Lancelot alone. But in the end Lancelot shall use this sword, and the bravest knight of Logres, the man he best loves in the world, shall fall beneath it. And that shall be Gawain. But soon thereafter shall come the last battle on the plain of Camlan, and the darkness shall fall once more upon Logres." Merlin left the scabbard of Balyn's sword in the castle, where Galahad should find it. But the sword with the new blade he set with its point in a great stone which floated by magic upon the water, and no one knew whither it went until on the day appointed it should come to Camelot. When all these things were done, Merlin came to King Arthur and told him of the dolorous stroke that Balyn had given King Pelles, and of how Balyn and Balan had fought and died upon the island in the river. "Alas," said King Arthur, "this is the greatest pity that ever I heard tell of two knights, and two such knights as these I have as yet never known in Logres."